Hey up everyone, in this video we are checking out the Fujifilm XC 15-45mm f3.5-5.6 OIS PZ, which is a compact and lightweight zoom for Fujifilm's X-mount cameras. This lens is mainly designed for photography, but of course also works for video on these hybrid cameras, and it's quite versatile and affordable. It has an equivalent focal length of 23 to 69mm on a full-frame sensor. It also has a variable aperture of f3.5-5.6, which is not very fast, but considering how small and light it is, you wouldn't expect much more from it. It costs around $300, which is quite cheap, yet this is more something you'd get in a kit if you don't already have other options available. At least this is how I ended up with it. To view the most up-to-date prices, you can click the links in the description below. This review is completely independent. I have no obligations to any entity. However, I strongly recommend that you check out other reviews to get the most comprehensive view of the product. Now let's get started with the review. The lens is made of plastic, which makes it very light and compact, but also feels a bit flimsy and cheap. It weighs only 135 grams, which is the lightest zoom lens for the X-mount system. The lens has a retractable design, which means that it collapses when not in use, and extends when you turn on the camera. This reduces the size of the lens when stored, but also adds an extra potential point of failure. The lens measures 44mm when collapsed, and up to 65.2mm when extended. In other areas, it has a simple design with only two rings, a focus ring and a zoom ring. The focus ring is at the front of the lens, and the zoom ring is behind it. Both rings are electronically coupled, which means that they do not have a direct mechanical connection to the lens elements. This means you do hear the motors activating whenever you turn one, and it's also less precise than manual rings. The zoom ring also controls the power zoom function, which could be interesting for video. There are two zoom speeds available depending on how far you twist the ring. Now, unlike most other Fujifilm lenses, there is no aperture ring on the camera, which means you will have to change it through the camera body. The lens is not very durable or weather sealed, so you have to be careful not to drop it or expose it to dust or moisture. The lens mount is also plastic, which can wear out over time. It also does not have any internal zoom or focus mechanisms, which means that the front element moves in and out when you zoom or focus. This can cause some front element wobble, which can affect the image quality and stability, especially in video. On the front, you'll find it has a 52mm filter thread, which is compatible with many filters and accessories, but you'll most likely have to utilize a step-up ring, which puts extra strain on an already fragile design. In terms of accessories, I don't remember that mine ever came with a lens hood, so to control flaring, you might have to just wing it with your hands or a booklet of some kind. The lens also comes with a front and rear lens cap, yet the rear cap was not made for permanent use. It was somewhat cheap and didn't click into place, so that eventually got thrown in the bin. The lens has a minimum focus distance of 0.13mm at the wide end and 0.35mm at the telephoto end. This means that you can get quite close to your subject, especially at the wide end. As we talked about earlier, it has a variable aperture of f3.5-5.6, which means that the maximum aperture changes depending on the zoom. This means that the lens is not very fast and can struggle in low light situations, especially at the telephoto end. The lens also has a minimum aperture of f22, which is common for most lenses. It has a smooth and accurate focus ring, which is electronically coupled to the focus motor. The focus ring has a linear response, which means that the focus distance changes proportionally to the rotation of the ring. Yet it does not have hard stops, making it somewhat problematic for video. Despite the poor build quality, the lens has a fast and quiet autofocus system, which is powered by a stepping motor. The autofocus system is compatible with Fujifilm's phase detection and contrast detection technologies, which enable quick and accurate focus acquisition and tracking. As you can see here, it's far faster than those primes I tested the last couple of weeks, although it suffers from more searching and often misses its target, which can make for a somewhat annoying user experience. Alongside this, the lens has very noticeable lens breathing, probably the heaviest I've ever seen. especially at the wide end. This could be very interesting to play with if you're interested in a more artistic approach to video work. However, for most people who dislike focus breathing, this is too much. The lens is not officially parfocal, yet in practice it does achieve a steady zoom without noticeable focus shift. I could not find much information about it, and this may just be a corrective feature, which means the lens changes focus depending on the zoom factor. This is what we call electronically parfocal. Alright, let's check out the image quality at 45mm f/5.6, which is the lowest you can go at this focal length. It's overall a pretty soft image, yet it does clear up at f8. And it gets pretty sharp even at f11. No real diffraction at this aperture yet. Stopping down to f16, we do see some diffraction entering the frame, and that's especially true in the corners. Stopping down to f22, that diffraction gets rather heavy and degrades overall image contrast and image sharpness. Taking a look at 15mm f/3.5. The image is decently sharp, although in the corners you can see it's quite soft with a lot of chromatic aberration. Stopping down to f4.0. Sharpness is still decent. Corner sharpness has minimal improvements though. Stopping down to f5.6 and we still see decent center sharpness, yet the corners have still not improved quite as much as we'd like. Stopping down to f8 and center sharpness is very good. The corners finally see some improvements now, yet I wonder if it's too late as diffraction may start to creep in here. Stopping down to f11. Center sharpness is still decent, although as expected we see a tad bit of diffraction coming into the image, decreasing the overall contrast and sharpness. Stopping down again to f16, diffraction is getting pretty heavy. The overall contrast of the image degrades again, stopping down to f22 now, and the image is overall just very soft. Not very enjoyable, to be honest. As for aberrations, at 45mm we see some pretty heavy pincushion distortions, which is to be expected. And when we go down to 15mm, some pretty heavy barrel distortions and slight vignetting at f3.5, but that quickly disappears when we stop down. In terms of chromatic aberrations, at 45mm it's quite heavy, a lot of blue fringing on the edges of these leaves, comparing it here to the 56mm from Viltrox, and you see that on this one they are less sharp than on the 15 to 45mm. Back to the 15 to 45, and now completely zoomed out, it's noticeably less, with almost no blue fringing around the edges. In terms of bokeh, it may prove to be quite difficult to achieve those nice out-of-focus backgrounds, although of course it's not impossible. Yet, when you do get some out-of-focus backgrounds, it's nothing to really write home about. There's no real character to it. Perhaps it's best suited for overhead rigs where no depth is needed, or in positions where you wouldn't wish to ruin a nice lens, for example, some kind of GoPro-like shot. But I'll leave that all up to you. It has a built-in optical image stabilization system, which is effective and useful for reducing camera shake and blur. The image stabilization system is based on a gyro sensor and a shift mechanism, which detect and compensate for the camera movement by moving the lens elements. The image stabilization system can provide up to 3 stops of stabilization, which means that it can allow for slower shutter speeds and in return a lower ISO setting, without compromising the image quality. Here is some sample footage with and without image stabilization, which can demonstrate the difference and the improvements in video. In the end, this is just one of those lenses that you get in a kit, grow out of very quickly, but after a couple of years just take it out for a spin again. Now for me personally, I do actually use it quite often for the overhead rig on my gaming setup, which records all the YouTube shorts on Flatlander gaming, allowing my 16mm to rest on the face cam, so it can be useful just to keep it around as a backup. Anyway, that was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that it was helpful. If it was, please consider checking out this video about the 18-55 from Fujifilm, which I would actually recommend far more than this lens.